Welcome into Road to the Draft, presented by Raymond James. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and we have made it. It is our last Road to the Draft.
The last stop on the road.
The last stop on the road, the last exit.
Pulled into the driveway.
Yes, we are officially here because the draft is next week, and so this is our final one of these, and we've talked about a lot of different positions. We've talked about a lot of different strategies and players and all of that, but one thing we have not talked as much about that I think in particular in the last week has gotten a little bit more steam or attention maybe is the discussion of whether or not we think the Bucs will trade up or back in that first round. So let's just talk about that as a concept at large of the likelihood of trades happening, what it would take to make a trade happen in that first round.
Yeah, we thought if we just did a straight who we're going to pick at 27, I'd probably say some name I've already said, like Devontae Wyatt, right? But there are a lot more possibilities because there are the possibilities of both trades up and trades down, and even in the first round. And Jason Light has actually traded his first round pick either up or down 3 times in his 8 years at the helm. There was the 2016 traded down a couple spots before taking Vernon Hargreaves. 2018 traded down 5 spots before taking Vita Vea. And then, as we talked about in our other show earlier today, in 2020 trade up 1 spot just to make sure Tristan Wirfs didn't get away. Really, the big trade there worth mentioning is the 2018 one because the Buccaneers wanted Vita Vea. Jason talked about how when they made the trade, then it was like you could hear a pin drop in the room for the next 4 picks because they were scared he would get taken. And then everybody erupted when they still got Vita Vea, but still got the player they were targeting and picked up 2 second-round picks. And one of those, after another little trade down, became Carlton Davis. So those things can really multiply your draft assets and allow you to come out of the draft with a lot more. Or in the case of a trade up, you use some of your assets to make sure you get a player you really covet.
So let's talk about that one first in particular. So trading up, how likely do you think that is, and what would be the goal or reason maybe, or are there certain players you think they might be wanting to target with something like that?
Yeah, Jason has made some other trades in like the 2nd or 3rd round, and they've usually been up to make sure that the Buccaneers get a certain player, like Ali Marpet is a good example. To make, a guy's getting close to you. That's basically what it is. If you have a guy you think is, or a guy or two that's at a certain tier that you don't think is going to make it to where you are, if you see them starting to slide a little bit, like Levante David did in 2012, at some point it's worth it to you to use one of your other draft assets to make sure you can jump up and get that guy. So I came up with a scenario of, I think it's realistic. Now, predicting any particular trade, I'm probably not going to hit on it right. As long as it's realistic, though, I think it's worth discussing. And what I looked at is pick number 20, where the Pittsburgh Steelers are. A lot of trades in the first round are driven by teams that are targeting quarterbacks.
Right.
Steelers are a team that many people think will take a quarterback. But the top 2 guys on most people's board, Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, could easily be off the board by pick number 20. And then they might be looking at a guy like Cincinnati's Desmond Ridder. But they also can look at every team between 20 and 27 and say, none of those teams are going to take a quarterback. We can trade back, get some more assets, and still get our guy. There's always the danger of somebody trading up between there.
Right.
But I think they can take the risk if they like, say, maybe 2 guys, Desmond Ridder and Matt Corral. So the Buccaneers have found a trade partner, and maybe a guy like Devontae Wyatt, they're afraid isn't going to make it. Or maybe they can get all the way up and get Jordan Davis, the other Georgia defensive lineman. Both of those guys are very highly rated. They come in a position that I think the Buccaneers could use help at. And they may not make it to 27. And if the Buccaneers think there's a big gap between those 2 guys and the next DTs on the list, then it's probably worth the risk. Or an edge rusher. A lot of those edge rushers are going to go early. But say a guy like Jermaine Johnson, which has kind of been all over the board, Florida State's Jermaine Johnson, an edge rusher. He's been getting a lot of good love lately, and he's been up some boards. But if he's sitting there at 15, 16, he hasn't been taken yet, the Buccaneers may start working on trying to come up with a trade to get a guy like that.
Right. Okay. And then now finally a trade down scenario, which I think sometimes can be less exciting than a trade up, but can be maybe even more beneficial depending on what you get out of it. And so what do you think it would take for the Bucs to do that? What would be their motivation, much less another team's motivation in being the trade partner?
Well, the Buccaneers' motivation for trading down would be that they have a player that they want to take, but they don't think necessarily that they need to use a first-round pick on him. That they can move back, gain some other assets, and still get that guy. And that's what I think here. Now, I forgot to mention in the last one, a trade of 27 up to 20. That happened exactly in 2014, and the Saints traded up that exact trade, and they had to pay a 3rd-round pick to do it. So that's what it would cost the Buccaneers.
Okay.
This scenario, the Buccaneers have a chance to pick up a 3rd-round pick, and that could be very valuable.
Yeah, they've done well in the 3rd round.
Yeah, and so if you have several 3rd-round picks, you have a better chance of hitting on a guy that can help you right away. In this case, we're still driven by quarterbacks, and what I looked at was a 4-pick span from picks 40 to 43. The first 2 are Seattle, and then Atlanta and Indianapolis. All 3 of those teams, if they don't take a quarterback in the first round, are teams that easily could be considering moving up to take a quarterback late in the first round. And the reason the teams like to do that is if you take a player in the first round, especially a quarterback, that player has that optional team option, 5th year on the contract, which is very valuable. And that started with the new CBA in 2013. And since then, it's happened twice. The Vikings moved up 8 spots to 32 to get Teddy Bridgewater, and the Ravens moved up 20 spots to 32 to get Lamar Jackson. The trade up that was 8 spots cost a 4th, and the trade up that was 20 spots cost a 2nd. So we're kind of right in the middle there. So I think you could estimate it would cost the Bucs a third. I mean, the Bucs could gain a 3rd if they trade with Atlanta, Indianapolis, or Seattle and go down to about 40 to 43. And if they do that, then they could possibly target a guy that they wouldn't have to take in the first round, like Kenneth Walker, the running back from Michigan State. He could be the first running back off the board, actually, or Breece Hall of Iowa State. They could take the first tight end, Trey McBride out of Colorado State. I think it's a position you could say is a position of need for the Buccaneers. And another guy that the Bucs have looked at, brought in for a visit, is a Houston defensive lineman, edge rusher, Logan Hall. So, there's a lot of options there. And if the Buccaneers at 27 feel like they've got 3 or 4 guys they like at these positions, and they can move back and probably get one of them, they could pick up an extra 3rd round pick.
Well, man, these are the discussions that make you remember how exciting the draft is, why everybody loves it, just like us.
Yeah, and if I went kind of fast through all those scenarios, but if you wanted to read more about them, I put them in my mailbag today on Buccaneers.com. So that's where I got this idea for this, and you can go back and review exactly what I was talking about.
Okay, perfect. Well, that is going to do it for us on our final road to the draft for this year. Make sure you are staying tuned to all of the draft coverage on Buccaneers.com and enjoy the draft.